Consumer surplus and producer surplus for A-level economics. Consumer surplus and producer surplus can be shown by the areas above and below equilibrium price. If price changes, so will consumer surplus and producer surplus. The surplus areas show the size of the benefit to either producers or consumers at a given price level. Consumer surplus. In the case of consumer surplus, it is shown by the blue shaded area. It is the area below the demand curve and above the line for the equilibrium price. The consumer surplus is the difference between the price that a consumer is willing to pay for a good or service and the price that they actually pay, i.e. the equilibrium price. Consumer surplus arises when the consumer ends up paying less for a good than the amount they were prepared to pay, and the amount of this money is the consumer surplus. In numerical terms, if a consumer was willing to pay £8 for a hat but bought it for £5, there would be a consumer surplus of £3. Since people have differing tastes and incomes and will have different amounts they would be willing to pay for a certain good, the concept of consumer surplus arises. In the case of producer surplus, it is shown by the red shaded area. It is the area above the supply curve and below the line for the equilibrium price. The producer surplus is the difference between the price that a producer is willing to supply a good or service at and the price that they actually receive for it, which is the equilibrium price. Different producers will face different costs when providing a good or service. Producer surplus arises when the producer receives more for a good than the price they would be willing to accept. The extra amount corresponds to the producer surplus. As a numerical example, if the equilibrium price for a hat is £5, but the producer would be fine in selling it for £3, then the producer surplus would be £2. Shifts in supply and demand. When either the supply curve or the demand curve shift, there is a change in price of the good. The change in price will bring the good closer to or further from the amount the consumer was willing to pay and the producer was willing to sell at. Therefore, the consumer surplus will change, as will the producer surplus. Diagrammatical examples. When the demand curve shifts from D to D1, the price decreases from P to P1 and the quantity decreases from Q to Q1. The consumer surplus experiences a change from ABP to CEP1, whilst the producer surplus changes from FBP to FEP1. When the supply curve shifts from S to S1, the price increases from P to P1 and the quantity decreases from Q to Q1. The consumer surplus experiences a change from ABP to ACP1, while the producer surplus changes from EBP to CFP1.